Good morning, everyone. I know some people are going to be continuing to stroll in, but let's get started. It's great to see you all here to explore careers in art museums and imagine what it might look like to be part of a place like this. So thank you so much for making time to come. I'm Jackie Terraza, and my role here at the museum is Vice President for Learning and Public Engagement. And I want to begin by thanking the students who were doing conversations in the galleries about works of art. In fact, let's give all of you a round of applause. You are doing a great job. I had such a fun time talking with many of you. So before we get going, I'm actually curious. I can still see you in the darkness. I'm curious to see who's in the room. Raise your hand if you are a high school student. Woohoo, great. If you're an undergraduate or city college student or getting an associate degree, welcome, great. Graduate students, great. Anybody postgraduate, recent graduates? All right, a few of you. And faculty or mentors? Great, well, thank you. It's great to kind of have a lay of the land of who is here. So as you think about where you are in your life and where you would like to be in the future, I want to invite you to reflect on where we are today and also on the land on which we are located right now. And to that end, I want to acknowledge that the Art Institute of Chicago is located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes also have called this area home, such as the Miami, the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, Sac, and Fox. The region has long been a center for indigenous people to gather, to trade, to maintain kinship ties. And today, one of the largest American Indian communities in the United States resides in Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of the city and to celebrate heritage, traditions, and care for the land and the waterways that we all benefit from. Where we are today and where we want to be in the future, in fact, suggests pathways. And we think a lot about pathways here at the museum, pathways to art and culture, and pathways to careers, or pathways through life. The first is about how you make art invaluable as a resource for your own life. The second one, when we think about careers, it's about how do you go about making a living in ways that support your own self-identity, in addition to very important financial, emotional, intellectual, physical, creative needs that you may have. So events like today are designed to open up opportunities and help you imagine your future. There are dozens of us today, staff members at the Art Institute, who are eager to talk with you and to help you do just that. And I also want to invite you to think of each other as resources. Think of yourselves as a temporary community that has come here to the Art Institute today, where you share many interests and many curiosities. So introduce yourself to people you don't know, talk to other students, in addition to talking to people with a badge like me who work here at the museum. Keep in mind that no path looks the same, as you will learn from the panel in a moment. There's no one right way to get there. The path for a high school student may look different than for a graduate student. And in fact, at any point in your life, you may choose or you may find yourself needing to switch pathways. And that is fine. At times that might feel very easy, and at times it might feel very difficult. I myself did not fully follow a conventional path, though I will say that for whatever reason, there was no question in my mind that art was going to be part of my pathway. I couldn't imagine my life in any other way. And I knew that education would play an important role in getting there, and I was grateful to my parents who were able to support me in getting an education. But my intention was to be, I think, an artist, maybe a graphic designer, maybe an illustrator. And over the course of my education, a few people in my life saw potential in me that I had not imagined for myself and pointed me to opportunities that I would have otherwise thought were not for me. I worked hard and I built relationships along the way. I also learned by doing, complementing practical work experience and participation with participation in short leadership programs and other training programs that helped me reflect on my own skills and sense of self. So my story is simply one to tell you that for me, I've never had a 5-year plan. I've never had very, very set goals, and I've been lucky that things have worked out. And my advice is that rather than having very, very specific and unfixable goals, that you think about self-reflection, that you stay open and think deeply about what interests you, what you value, what you need, and what you're best at. And that you also might think about what you don't like to do and what you're not good at. That's also equally helpful. Along with self-reflection, I encourage you to build relationships, not because anybody should use relationships to get what you want, but rather because it is in relation to others that we know ourselves best and that we see opportunities that might not have been apparent to us on our own. And as you pursue opportunities, consider the fact that you are valuable. For instance, we at the Art Institute need you. It is by working with and learning with the diversity of people like you who can think critically and creatively about our world that museums like the Art Institute can continually stay relevant. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the advisors and the faculty members who have encouraged you to be here. I'm grateful also for the support of the Ford and Walton Foundations, the McMullen Family Foundation, and our university partners, which together make today's event possible. And finally, I want to thank Maddie Scherer, Sam Ramos, and the dozens of colleagues from across the departments of the museum for doing their part to make this event a success. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sam Ramos, Assistant Director for College and Professional Learning. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, just want to echo what Jackie said, and thank you all for being here. I think it's, shows energy, proactive energy to an enthusiasm that you're thinking about these things and that you're willing to come out and be in the cold and then hang out for a day and learn about some of these things happening in the museum. So thank you for being here and for bringing all of that positive energy. What we're going to do here is we're going to try to have a pretty open conversation that shares thoughts and experience about what we've done and how we've gotten here to the museum and what we do and so on, and for about an hour. So we're going to try to be finished up by 12:50, and then I'm going to talk through some of the things that are coming up for the rest of the day to help you sort of prepare for what comes next. And then I will say that about halfway through or so, we're going to open up to your questions, and we'll have mics set up so that you can sort of get up and ask a question if you have it. But this is only going to be about an hour, and we're quite aware that this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the things that we could talk about, all the things we could share, and all the questions that any of us would have for you about the things that are interesting and important to you as people who are interested in the arts and careers in museums. So you are going to have opportunities after this to keep talking to staff and keep talking to other people in the museum who might be able to answer questions for you. So don't feel like if you didn't get your question answered here right now that you won't have another chance, because you will. So with all that said, I want to go ahead and try to introduce everybody, or have us introduce ourselves, and you can see our names and titles here, but I would like to just go around and start by asking each of our panelists if you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do here in the museum, and then finally, if you could, to tell us how you got your job. How did you get this job? And we'll sort of take turns and go around, and whoever wants to start can go ahead.
Can you hear me? I'm Anna Maria Carvalho Van Meter, and I am a philanthropic advisor to major gifts within the museum's development department, which means that I work with our donors on identifying what they might be interested in terms of supporting, whether it's exhibitions or our public programming, focused on our institutional priorities and where we're fundraising. And I got this job in a kind of, fundraising is funny because I don't think when I was in school there were actually fundraising courses or degrees. So I have a degree in comparative literature with a minor in French. And I fell into fundraising, and I had 2 jobs on the educational side previous to coming to the museum. But I was looking to change over to arts and culture. And so I started looking at my contacts in LinkedIn and thinking of people who I might know who have ever worked here or knew a little bit about the art world, and applied and had a couple of phone interviews with colleagues who worked here or previously worked here. And I think that helped my resume get flagged or get a little bit extra attention, and that helped me get the role.
Great.
Hey everybody, I'm Nikhil Trivedi. I'm a director of engineering, web engineering here at the Art Institute. And like Jackie and Anna Maria, my pathway to my current job wasn't quite linear either. I started out of high school working for the company that makes Beanie Babies. I was doing, yeah, you can laugh, that's funny. I was doing graphic design for them, making sales flyers and things, and it was before the internet happened. So we pitched the idea of like, hey, what do you think about having a website? Maybe we can make one for you. And this president was kind of like, meh, yeah, why don't you try that? We'll see what happens. Maybe this internet thing will take off. So I really learned how to build websites by building them for this big company. And it was before the trend really took off. So then once the trend took off, then it was like a whole other set of learning of what a high traffic website needs. So I worked there for like a year and a half, doing a lot of really interesting things. We did product launches on their website. We probably had like one of the first blogs that existed on the internet. We like personified a different Beanie Baby every month, and they kept a diary online. And we created this world of the nursery and like gossip and relationships in between them, between the Beanie Babies. It was a lot of fun. But I worked there for like a year and a half, and then ran my own web company for like 3 years. And I was like between 19 and 22 at the time. So I was pretty young and ambitious to be running a web company, but we did for like 3 years. And then I got a job after the dot-com bubble crashed, so did our company. I worked for a small telecom company for 5 years. And during all that time, I was going to undergrad part-time to pay my way through school. So all these jobs were really critical for me to just afford going to college. So after 8 years of that, I felt like I finally came to a place where I could do what I wanted to do, where I wasn't beholden to sort of these expectations that I need to get a degree to do this thing that I'm kind of already doing, so it feels kind of pointless, but I'm being told I need to do it. So I finished the degree, and I felt like I could do what I wanted to do. Then I started becoming an avid reader, sort of an aside. I never really read for like the first 20-some years of my life. But then when I felt like I could read what I wanted to read, I was just consuming books. So before college, I had actually wanted to go to art school, but my immigrant parents were like, you're not going to art school. So after the 8 years and I was done, in college, one of my professors randomly mentioned this benefit you have by working here, that you can take classes at the School of the Art Institute for free. And I sort of planted that in the back of my head until I was done with college. And I specifically looked for jobs here just actually so I could take advantage of that benefit. I'm not a person who like came here with like a love of museums and like I really want to work at museums and at this museum. Is really a practical reason that I wanted to get a job here. So I scoured the job postings for like 6 months until something popped up that I qualified for, put my resume into the ring, went through the interview process, and I got the job, and that was 14 years ago.
Is this working? Yes. Hi, I'm Susie Oppenheimer. I'm a curatorial associate in modern and contemporary art, which is one of the 11 curatorial departments in this museum. There's a lot of intersections within all of them, but we represent maybe the second and third floor of the modern wing, if you're familiar with those collection galleries, and some of the exhibitions that pass through those galleries as well. And I have maybe a bit more of a conventional background. I have definitely circled around museums since high school. I had internships in high school and then later in college all around museums, which I guess stemmed from, like many people here, a love of art making when I was younger. I knew I loved to make objects, I loved to make things, and I also really loved history. And when I was in high school, I had never even known that I wasn't from a background where art history was culturally involved in my upbringing. But when I was in history classes in high school, I realized that there was this moment of kind of eureka when we would learn from objects or from kind of information, visual information. That was the way I thought, that was the way I learned. And so museums felt like a natural progression from that. And so I started interning in high school, also in college. I traversed various types of work in museums. I started with education, which I really loved, but it was only when I met someone in the curatorial department who really I connected with and was from a similar, was the first queer person I met in a museum setting that I felt connected to and realized the possibility of what curatorial work could do. From then, it just took off for me, and I've been in and out of curatorial positions, also commercial gallery work for the last 10 years, and ended up in Chicago. Didn't start in curatorial work here. I found a position, like many people here, where the first thing that kind of rang a bell, which was working in an affiliate group programming, Asian art programming here. So we would do lectures and events around Asian art and there's so many different things that you can do with that. So it was actually a really exciting position. And from there, when there was an opening in modern and contemporary, I leapt at that since that is my background.
Thank you. So as far as I go, I'm the Sam Ramos, Assistant Director for College and Professional Learning in the Department of Learning and Public Engagement. And my job, like all of us, I think there's many different kinds of things that I do that sort of fall under my umbrella of the scope of my work and my position. But to keep it very concise, I teach with art. I actually think it's cool that Nikhil's department is called Experience Design, because I was thinking recently about how I feel like that's what I do a lot, is I design experiences that are presumably memorable learning experiences in one form or another, but I think a lot about what that even means. How do you connect with people using artwork? How do you connect people with artwork? What does history have to do with that? What do our personal lives have to do with that? And I do a lot of that in the galleries, a lot of gallery teaching. So just to try to keep that as concise as possible. And in terms of how I got this job, I want to try to be specific, because I could sort of give you my whole path, but like has been mentioned a little bit, I am hesitant to do that because I don't want it to sound like if you want to have my title someday that you're supposed to do all the stuff I did. So I will say that I saw this job posted online on the museum's careers website, which probably many of you have looked at before. And I read the job description and I thought that all looks like stuff that I'm interested in. It's teaching, it's working with college students and adults, which is something that I had been doing already. And it's at the Art Institute, which I had a lot of familiarity with from being a student and then also teaching at the school and so on. And so I decided to apply, thinking that there's no way I was going to get the job. Also, I would say if you're applying for a job that you know you're going to get, it might not be the best job you could have. Or what I'm saying is you might not be pushing yourself enough. Maybe you can do even more. So I get excited about applying for positions that may on paper look like I'm not ready for, and then just forcing the person who's doing the hiring to make that decision. Because I'm always going to say I can do it. And that's what I did with this job. And not expecting to hear anything back. And then I happened to have sort of a mentor who I had worked with at SAIC at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, who I really admired, and I just reached out randomly and said, hey, I've applied to a couple of museum jobs in Chicago. Do you happen to know anybody? And she did happen to know somebody in the department, and so I did reach out to that person and say, this mentor, this faculty member who we both know said I should reach out to you. Here's my stuff that I applied with. Here's my cover letter. Here's my resume, and so on. And then that didn't get me the job or anything as far as I know, but I think that it just got me some attention, and that they thought maybe for a couple extra minutes or a few extra minutes about me. And then I did an interview on the phone, which I was shocked to get, and I prepared for, and there were a lot of things that I had to immediately start researching, like, for example, what's a gallery talk? And then did the interview on the phone, and then they flew me in to do an in-person interview and like a mock gallery talk, which is a whole story in itself as far as how that went. And then I didn't think I was going to get the job, and then they called me and I did. And then soon after that, I was here in the museum and sitting at my little desk and working. So that's some of my story. So I have a follow-up question to sort of get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty around our experiences and advice, which is, what is one specific piece of advice that you might give to someone here who wants to do what you do? And I'm happy to start just to give you all a moment to maybe think about it. And I would say that for me, there's many things, but probably the thing that comes most to mind that's most sort of practical is, if you're interested in doing something in learning in museums, teach as much as possible. So like if you see internships or TA-ships or mentorship opportunities or whatever, if you want to teach a lot, and take every opportunity you can to be in front of people, supporting them and their learning. That was crucial to my being able to be here with you today.
I can start. There are two things that come to mind. And I heard this piece of advice at a CAA panel that like really I connected to, which is, if you're gonna go into something that's really art historically based, whatever the subject matter, whatever lens you wanna use, you have to really feel it and love it, because you'll feel differently about it over the course of your career. There will be really difficult moments. There will be moments where you have to overcome something, or a vanguard that doesn't suit you, or information that is difficult to bear. And when you really love a subject matter, you're faithful to that, and you're willing to defend it. And then the second piece, the more practical piece, is just to work well with people, no matter who they are. It's everybody. It's not just finding a mentor. It's really connecting and listening to and talking to every person at every level, whether it's the public, whether it's your colleagues. You're working with people all the time, and all of them are important to getting the mission done. And truly, if you can have the patience to do that and listen and really connect with others, no matter, I'm very introverted. This is really nerve-wracking to be on stage, but when I talk to people, I try to just connect in that way, and that's important, I think, to succeeding.
Can I have a quick show of hands just to get a sense? How many people in the room are interested in programming development of any sort? Okay, a few hands. So to those folks, I'll say, I'm 41, and my expectation is, and I've been learning this whole time, and my expectation is that I'm gonna continue to be learning for another 41 years. Technology is changing so fast. There's always new things coming out. There's always new tools to learn, new languages to learn, new platforms to learn. So expect that you'll always be learning, and like, if you're not really excited about that process, that's something to consider. So two things more specifically come to mind. GitHub is a place, it's like a social network for code. People can create profiles, put projects up on there, and collaborate with other people's projects that they're building. And it's created this community, it's created various communities around projects around the world. So create a presence on GitHub. Make sure you have a GitHub account. Put your projects on there. and write on there. Like to me, reviewing someone's code is something that I do collaboratively with that other person. But reviewing documentation is something that I do by myself. So document everything that you do. Write as much as you can, and put as much of your writing as you can on the internet. And that sort of goes into the second thought that I have is take over your Google search results, because expect that people are going to Google you. That's like the least effort thing we could do in our world today, like besides breathing. Like Googling takes no effort whatsoever. So expect that people are going to Google you. And I'm sort of like in an interviewing process right now, so that's why this like really comes to mind. I feel like consider your Google search results as an extension of your interview. So consider what you want people to know about you, and take that as an opportunity to share a little more about yourself. And that could look like creating a Pinterest account and creating, I don't know what Pinterest calls them, boards or whatever, like creating like collections of things that say something about yourself to potential people who are going to be looking at your resumes and interviewing you. Create a GitHub account and document as much as you can on there. Create a blog and sort of write as much as you can. And blogs are interesting spaces because you don't need answers to have a blog. You could just document questions that you're having, things that you're wondering about. Put as many things that you're wondering about as you can in searchable places. Just take over your Google search results and really like do as much as you can there.
I would say in development and fundraising, part of my job is meeting with donors on a very frequent basis and sometimes asking for money. And a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I could never do your job. I could never ask someone for money. And so for me, part of being good at my role is acknowledging that I'm not always going to be comfortable in every situation, and that's okay. So kind of acknowledging like you might be anxious or afraid or just not in your comfort zone, and that's okay. That's part of the job. That's part of the learning process. So you can even practice in terms of like networking events, and I'm sure your schools have things to put you in a situation where you have to go out and kind of sell yourself a little bit and get to know people that you wouldn't otherwise be speaking with, and all that is good practice.
Thanks. This occurred to me whenever y'all were talking. I'm on LinkedIn. Are all of you on LinkedIn? Is anybody not on LinkedIn? I'm not necessarily saying you should get on LinkedIn, but there's that. It's like the only social media I'm on. I don't know if I don't think it counts as social media. I don't know. It's social. So my next question is like I want to think about internships a little bit, because I think a lot of people here are probably thinking about, should I do this internship, and have questions about it and that sort of thing. And it's a big part of the sort of museum culture and sort of the culture and professional culture generally. But I want to start with a question that maybe seems really basic, which is if anybody up here on the panel wants to try to describe what an internship is. And then maybe tell us, the question I have is, what is an internship? And then also, what has been your experience or non-experience with internships?
I've had a zillion, so I'm happy to talk about it. I think I was very lucky in the course of my career that all of my internships were paid, and I have to say that makes the difference. Either finding those paid internships, no matter where they are. I've had internships at large museums like the Met. I've had internships at the Rubin Museum, the Museum of Biblical Art, which I don't think exists anymore. And what was really valuable about all of those things and what I felt I experienced was just knowing how a museum functions, what a museum is. So in high school, and it was a program, I think, for exposure for public school students where I grew up. And I learned what it looks like in storage, how art is conserved. I learned a lot just by being there, by seeing what departments make up a museum. And it was based in education, so I would work with, I think it was 2 to 5-year-olds, just teaching assistant. And so I had somebody I could watch do that work. It wasn't a whole lot of pressure on me, but I learned a great deal by watching. And then later with like college internships, where you do have more responsibility and it is more interesting in terms of, you have more challenges that you have to overcome, I think. I can think most recent, my last internship was in a curatorial department, and I did kind of the muck of exhibitions, but it was really rewarding. So we worked on an exhibition, Shari Levine Mayhem at the Whitney, and it was my first foray with a living artist. So you're working, I'm not talking directly to her, but I'm learning how to navigate how it is to work with someone who has preferences of how their work is shown that might not coalesce or be the curator's vision, let's say, and learning what are those little things that we can do to make this work together. And then doing little things like pulling together back matter for catalogs, like the things that no one is looking at in the book. Like, that was me, and I'm proud of that. And it let me understand how to work with other people now in my position in a curatorial department, and also just realizing how important every little detail is.
I did want to point out before we continue that we've put out the microphone stands, if you didn't notice, and so you can feel free as you think of questions to go ahead and walk up to one of the mics, and then when we have a pause, we'll be prioritizing your questions. And as I noted earlier, don't worry, it's very unlikely we're going to get to everyone's questions, but we're going to try, and then you'll have more opportunities in the rest of the day to ask questions as you have them. So, but just so you're aware that those are there. I was thinking, the reason I wanted to ask about the what is an internship thing is because I think, like, what is an intern and what is an internship is because we talk about internships a lot in the museum, and internship culture is something that we're trying to sort of to shift, because as you noted, there are those internships that are paid, there's those internships that are unpaid, and there's still far too many of the unpaid version, which is like labor in the museum that you're doing presumably because it's a learning experience and you can make connections and so on, which is true, but then it's also work essentially that too often has just not been paid for with actual money that you can pay rent for with and buy food with and so on. So it's something that we're thinking about a lot as to what that means for you and for people who are in the museum already. And that question for me about what is an internship is sort of crucial a little bit, because I think we take it for granted, and I honestly don't know how to define what it is, other than to say it's somebody who's working in the museum, who's beginning their career, and that typically that position is going to be temporary, and it may or may not be paid. I will tell you that from my own experience, I had 0 internships during my school period, grad school and undergrad, because I didn't want to do any work extra, like I was doing work that I got money for, and I only understood that internships didn't pay, and so I was just didn't even consider it and didn't have time for it. But I did do one unpaid internship at the Smithsonian in between undergrad and grad school that did happen to be in education, but I don't think had anything to do with me getting my job here, as far as I know. So it's how you're strategic about how you do those things can also be pretty important. Like, how do you figure out which internships are a good use of your time, and sort of maybe skip over the ones that might not be quite right or useful for you right now. I don't know if anybody had additional thoughts about your own experience with internships.
I likewise have never done an internship. I've never had interns. But quickly, I don't know the number offhand. Sam, do you know like how many of our internships here are paid versus unpaid?
I actually don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know that we're working really hard here to make as many of our paid internships paid as possible. There's still some that are unpaid, but it's surprisingly low number, and is continuing to get lower. And the goal is 0 unpaid internships.
Mm-hmm. So I don't feel like too equipped to answer your question because I've never really had one. But speaking to like the beginnings of a career, I would suppose that like an internship could be just like a chance to tinker with something, to sort of dip your toe in something that sounds kind of interesting and curious. I recognize that like there could be some levels of privilege that allow someone to just dip their toe into something that may not be accessible to everybody. And that's probably why I never had an internship. I'm just thinking out loud.
Did you have a thought, or? Cool. So let's go ahead and take our first question from the audience here.
Hi, this is not, oh, it is on.
And could you tell us your name and
Yes.
maybe your school, if you're in school?
Okay, so hi, my name is Pierre. I work here at the Art Institute of Chicago, part of Teen Council, kind of like an internship here. I go to Rich South High School in the South Suburbs. So I'm a senior right now, and I'm making a lot of heavy decisions because I'm about to go to college at U of I, right? And I'm curious on what I should be doing right now to prepare myself and what opportunities I should be looking for when it comes to an environment like the Art Institute of Chicago. Because I want to know the next step of, because right now this is going to end, this internship as teen council, and it's an amazing opportunity. I curate and facilitate events and be able to do spoken word poetry in the galleries. I just want to know what the next step of that would be as a freshman in college on where I could go, or if there are more available internships here that being a part of this could lead me into.
Yeah, great question.
I think you mentioned events, and event planning is a very broad area. And you can get a lot of experience in event planning at all sorts of different nonprofits. I did a lot of event planning at a community organization, at a private school. So I think that's something you can either, not in event planning, but just broadly, you can either find something small at a big organization where you're just getting that entry-level experience, or you can find something where you're wearing multiple hats at maybe a middle-sized or a smaller organization where you're really doing a lot more. So it doesn't have to be one path, but you can think about, do I want to work at a smaller place, or do I want to work at a bigger place where maybe there would be an opportunity down the road?
Something that I think it's really amazing to be in Chicago and to be going to U of I, and there's so many different forms of the art world here and art scenes here. And something I wish I did and didn't do is there's so much to do here. Like, if you go and see all of the shows that you like, you go to all of the events that you like, you're gonna end up speaking to people who are interested in the same things as you. And then there's a way that kind of organically, knowing a lot is rewarding to begin with, knowing what's going on in Chicago, because you'll find out exactly what sparks the best side of yourself, the best knowledge that you have, the things that are interesting to you, and the things that you can do. We have internships here, but there are so many other like nonprofit spaces that you were talking about, and smaller museums, and just getting involved at all. Like, we were talking about payment too, and I know that there aren't, while we're working toward paid internships on every level, and I think other schools are, like, there were periods where like that wasn't enough for me, and I would work a job for, like, I would have this job, but I would also find, like, I can do this on Saturday then. I could do this one, like, I could assist in a classroom in Buddhist art studies for 5-year-olds. And it wasn't necessarily what I thought I wanted to do, but I fell in love with it just because everything can be exciting if you devote yourself to it. So I think just exposure is my answer.
And I would say do as much as you can towards the things that you're really passionate about. So like try to step back and name what it is that you're really passionate about, and try to find as much space to do those things as you can. And I say that recognizing that, like, if you're a high school student, your life could easily become completely filled up with like all the things that are required to make your life look like what college admission algorithms expect. But I know, like, thinking back to my senior year, I remember there was a moment where I had some friends over, and we were watching Reservoir Dogs, which at the time was like this movie that we heard a lot of buzz about and we all wanted to watch. I had 3 buddies over. They were all watching the movie, and I was sitting in my room at a computer, like, making some web page. And I, like, was not a good friend in that moment because I was completely checked out because I was just really into this thing that I was doing. But I think, like, you know, I was carving out time and space to, like, follow the things that I was passionate about. I talked to a friend last week who, when she was in college, she created a gallery space that was the size of a parking spot. And she collaborated with a group of other people where like she would organize something in the space for 3 months, and then another group of people would organize something for the next 3 months. Really small, really quick to iterate on things, and really like doable, right, for someone who is also doing a million other things. So try to like be creative about like how to do that, how to carve out time and space to do the things that you're passionate about.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And then I see another question over here.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I attend DePaul University. And I was wondering, when you're reviewing resumes and stuff for internships that we apply for, what do you look for? Do you look for more broad experiences that last for shorter times? Do you look for really intensive research experiences for multiple years? What sort of makes a candidate stand out on a resume in one page?
I will tell you that for myself in learning and public engagement, and probably this is true for all of us to some extent, is one of the primary things I'm concerned about is whether this person seems like they're really genuinely interested in this opportunity. Like they clearly looked at the job description. I can tell from their cover letter that they're enthusiastic, that they have something to say that makes it clear that they have an energy and a passion and a need for this opportunity, because I want it to be a benefit to them. And if it's just something to like add to their resume, it's going to come across. So I think one thing I would say is, as you're choosing what to apply for, is only apply for those things that are worth your time, so that you can really make that application the best that it can possibly be. Because if you apply for 20 internships and you only actually care about 2 of them, that's not going to come across. It's going to look like you applied to 20 internships. So that's how I would respond to that. I don't know if anybody has other thoughts. That kind of covers it sounds like.
Thank you.
So thank you for that question. I think that's really important as people are thinking about what they should be, they should be spending their energy and how they should be approaching these applications. I see another question. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Amira. And my question was kind of inspired by something that Susie said, but I'd love for all of you to answer it. And you mentioned that one of the things that's helped you is knowing what your subject is and the things that motivate you to do it, because there will be challenges that kind of make you rethink what you're doing sometimes. And I just was curious if you had any like elaboration on that, and like the types of things that you've gone through and how you've kind of gotten yourself back on your own path. Yeah.
Sure. That's like a really huge question, and I'm really grateful that you asked it. I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with the challenges that happen in museums. I mean, I'm thinking of equity issues. I'm thinking of representation issues. I'm thinking of there's an old guard. There's a young generation. There's everything in between that has nothing to do with age. But there are definitely challenges that happen every day. And, you can read an article and know something's wrong. And you can also be in a conversation with a person and realize that, like, the conversation you're having is a problem. And I appreciate, when I was saying that, I was thinking about how in some of those conversations, there's a little bit of a difference you can make. There's sometimes not a huge difference you can make, especially I'm in a support role, and I've risen. I started as an assistant, but you have to figure out how you can make little changes in your day-to-day life and little changes within the museum that I think the hope is that they snowball into something different. And I think there's also just major ways that can influence change that have nothing to do with being part of the museum too, where it comes from outside the museum and generates change. And I think there's ways you can do it from inside the museum. And I think that's my answer, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that came up, because I think if you're here, then hopefully that means that to some extent at least you feel welcome, that you felt welcome enough and comfortable enough to enter the space and then want to be in it. I know that for some people that can be a real struggle because there are things, a lot of things about the museum and about art that can seem exclusive, and there are power dynamics that can be off-putting or intimidating or oppressive. And so I think one thing I'd say about coming into this space is to come in, to maintain hope that your work matters and that you matter. I think that for me, that's really important because I know that, like, as a person of color who's talking about artworks that are made often by people who don't look like me or come from where I come from or so on, that could be something that if I let it stop me, I would really slow me down. But I get excited about those challenges, that I like problems that need a solution. I like big problems that need a solution and being a part of solving them. And I think that everybody up here in their work, as I've seen, has demonstrated that kind of energy in different ways. And I think that you'd be surprised how many people, hopefully, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but how many people in the museum, at least who I can speak for myself, who I work with all the time, are passionately engaged with those kinds of questions and thinking about them all the time. And if you're interested in those things and you think those are important, I would say we definitely want you to join us and help us sort of like find progress and move things forward. I think, yeah. And did we cover that for you okay?
Yeah.
In our like short answers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that.
And then I think you were waiting, and then we have another question over here.
Hi, I'm Emmanuel Owusu. I'm coming from North Central College in Naperville. I actually did take some time to look at some of the internships you offer, and two of them, but one of them actually stood out to me. It was the youth and family programs, and I wanted to know a little bit more of that because one thing that I'm passionate about is like mentorships because I come from the south side of Chicago, and a lot of times I really want to use art and art exposure to kind of help teach youth. But I wanted to know, in the youth and family programs, is that part of the internship? Like, do they do outreach, or is there any internships that might do art exposure towards impoverished communities?
What's your name again?
Emmanuel Owusu.
Great, thank you. Yeah, please apply. Yeah, youth and family programs, the internship is in the Department of Learning and Public Engagement. And yes, I would say that those are questions, mentorship, outreach, thinking about, especially about communities in Chicago that are, and using artwork to kind of do those things and think and reflect about them and be active about them are very important to the work that we do and that we care about, and to the people who work specifically in youth and family programs. So I'm in adult learning, which is in the same department, but like working a little bit with different programs and different audiences a little bit. There's some overlap. And actually our question from Pierre, he's in the teen council, as he noted, and that is within youth and family programs. So you'd be working with people like him and others who are from the city of Chicago, Chicago Public Schools, and thinking a lot about engagement and community and artwork and reflecting about these equity issues and so many other things. And so I would say, yeah, if that's something you're interested in, absolutely you should apply. I would, and hopefully, I don't know, that's just the beginning, but feel free to touch base with me again later today or in the future. We'll be happy to talk with you more about it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anne. I go to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and back with what Susie was talking about with kind of the challenges of making sure that you're passionate about what you're doing. How did you know that you were there and that was the field that what kind of realization brought you to the point where you were like, this is where I'm supposed to be?
That's another great question. I think it's a constant. Like there were moments where, like, I could talk about being in a history course and learning about like memento mori and the way that like skulls were embedded in a painting to remind you of death, which connected to me when I was 16, but that wouldn't like work for me now the same way. But there there are moments where that dips for me, and then there are moments where I'm like, oh my God, thank God I'm in this field. Like, this is what I love. And sometimes that's seeing, like we were talking earlier about some of the docent tours that took place earlier. While I didn't see any of the ones this morning, like hearing people talk about work. And for example, we just closed an Eleanor Anton show that was a really satisfying show to put together. And I worked with Sam on a gallery talk on that, and hearing how people responded to the work. Like, yeah, it's great that I loved that carving 1972, but hearing what it meant for people, which was completely different than maybe what it meant for me, that reified to me that I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad that this is what I chose to do.
I would say I spent 15 years in education. I started as a teacher, and then I got into the fundraising side in different school networks and a private school, and probably the whole time felt like I don't know if education is where I want to stay. I like that it's a component of my career. And then my switch to the Art Institute and to arts and culture, it's not necessarily yes, there's a moment and I knew that I was supposed to be here. I think your career takes different turns, and that's okay too. So it's not necessarily one snapshot where you can say, I've found my path, and you can look back on all your different experiences and pull and see how those experiences helped you get somewhere.
Yeah, I tend to think more about projects than jobs, right, than positions that I have. So I feel like, I'll work on a project for like 3 months or 1 month or a year. And in some moments of my life, like, yes, that project is exactly what I want to be doing right now. And other moments of my life, like, this project is just kind of meh, but it's like kind of satisfying for now. And it kind of goes in waves. I've been at this job for 14 years. And I've been here for that long for a reason, right? But it's not, that reason isn't necessarily because like this is the job for me. The reason is because like the projects that I've been able to work on have kept me here. And those projects are constantly changing.
Great, thank you. And just a heads up, we've got about 10 minutes for the conversation part, and then we're gonna jump into our sort of logistics moment before we finish up. And I see another question over here.
I think she was first before me.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, as someone who kind of came across the museum career path later in their college career, like I just graduated with my master's, what kind of advice do you have for building up those experiences and requirements that a lot of the job applications have on there, like when you didn't start gathering those experiences in high school, I guess? You've kind of touched on it a little bit, but.
Thank you for that question. What you're making me think of is how I had no clue this job even existed up until I saw it on the Museum Career website. As I think that something that Jackie said and that some of us others, that it wasn't necessarily like planning for my entire career to have this specific job so that I could do this panel today or like whatever. It was like from moment to moment chasing the things that were interesting and passionate, or that I had passion for, and doing that thing. So actually, I dropped out of college originally and it took like 5 years writing and working in retail and like learning a bunch of other things, and then returned to school. So I think my response initially would be that you're just fine and that you should keep doing the things that you're interested in now that you can do, that you care about doing and that you are qualified for, or even slightly underqualified for, if you can get those positions. And then eventually, when the right moment comes up, you'll see an opportunity here in the museum that fits what you have done already and that what you have already been caring about. So that was my thought, and if other people had thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of when I look at resumes, I'm not necessarily looking for like boxes to be checked, like, yes, they have done or can do this, they could do this, they can do this, they can do this. Maybe at like a really like rudimentary high level that does happen, but I think ultimately what I'm looking for is that the person is making the case for the job. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like you already have these skills. It might mean that like you have a passion for the thing that's happening and an active like willingness to do what it takes to learn to do it. Just make the case and think less about like the check boxes.
And just quickly, and I'm not sure you need this or maybe other people do, but I've been unemployed for like, sometimes it was a month at a time, sometimes it was close to 6 months, and I thought I was never going to get hired anywhere, and I did, then those dips happen, and it's okay. You just got to keep trying. Thanks.
We're over here.
Hi, my name is Ashley from Lake Forest College. I'm a junior this year. I am currently interning at a nonprofit organization in a community, and like you said, looking for mentors. Like, what would you recommend? Like Susie said, the position, I have many hats in the job, and I really enjoy it. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and this summer, I also have another opportunity in a private art collection. And how would you recommend finding my mentor in my career?
Sometimes at nonprofits, you might befriend a colleague or perhaps a volunteer who is involved in the organization but isn't your boss, or maybe a board member. And so I think it's okay and sometimes welcomed for someone in your position to say, oh, would you be interested in having a coffee with me? And maybe just start a conversation there. And you never know, maybe you'll keep in touch with that person, or maybe that person might think of you in a year or two when you're looking for that next step and refer you to an opening.
Yeah, I feel like I've been a mentor and I've had mentors in various points of my life, but we've rarely ever named it that. I think ultimately it's been about connecting with someone and we just kept talking. That's really how my partner ended up together. We really just kept talking. So like, reach out to folks, and not everyone will get back to you, and that's okay. But when you do like connect with someone, just try to find ways to keep talking to them, and use the opportunities of the conversations you have, like pocket away questions that it'd be useful to sort of get someone's take on.
I've definitely had conversations where I was hoping to find a mentor and faced rejection or some level, or just got ghosted or whatever. But if you just, I think, keep trying and keep being brave about, if you meet someone and you feel connected to them and you feel like they have something that could guide you, just to keep going with that. That can happen in a private collection. That could happen in a nonprofit space. And that can happen with like that could happen with a friend who recommends a book to you that changes the way you think about things. There's different types of mentorship.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christina, and I go to DePaul University. My question was more towards Anna Maria, and how difficult or not difficult was the transition from your current position from education to your current position?
So I was at a private independent school, pre-K through 12th grade, and I was their director of development. So this is an example of me wearing many different hats. I was working with the moms whose kids were at the school and doing a lot of volunteer management, and I was doing the annual fund, and I was doing event planning. And so I had all this array of experience, and I had been there for a long time. So I had gotten promoted over the years, and I think that stood out on my resume too. But I also had kind of an arts background. I was a ballerina for many years, and my different family members were artists, and I kind of always had that in the back of my head where I wanted to get back into the arts in my career. But all those things came into play nicely because in my current role, and by the way, my current role is very focused on major gifts, so I have a portfolio of donors, and I work with each of those donors very carefully and strategically to get them to think about making gifts to the museum. And I had just a slice of my previous role was in major gifts, and that was okay. That's something that we touched on. Like, my resume didn't say I've had 10 years of experience in major gifts. It just said I knew a little bit about it. And so that was a nice transition to be able to focus on that. But all that came in handy when I came to the museum because I was already used to dealing with a lot of different personalities and making asks and kind of selling the institution that I worked at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Thomas, and I go to DePaul University. And I was wondering, not only in roles like curator, but also in roles like collections manager, how important nowadays is getting a graduate degree in the application process? Because I know that's getting more and more difficult.
I know that there is a range. I know our current collection manager for modern and contemporary art, who is amazing, doesn't have higher education. He's just very good at, he's very passionate and remembers and knows the little details and the threads that guide the whole process. And he's great. I do know a lot of people do get higher education now. I think it helps in some ways, and but there's a range. I have my master's, and but I've done things before and after that.
I know that more and more there's an awareness that you can have very talented people, very effective professionals who have not completed a higher degree or a bachelor's, even depending on the position. So look out for positions that say master's degree preferred or suggested or whatever, as opposed to saying required. As I mentioned earlier, my instinct has always been that if I want a job, regardless of what the qualifications say, I'm going to apply because I want the person hiring to make the decision. I'm going to always say yes to myself. So that's also what I would suggest. But that is something that there's an increasing awareness that you don't necessarily have to have a PhD or a grad degree in order to do a lot of the work that we do.
Could we do a quick poll up here? How many of us have postgraduate degrees? I do not. Anna Maria does.
I have a MFA in writing. This shows how much I know. I don't even know. I was like, do I have a postgraduate? I don't,
think
or
that
do
counts.
I? Does that count?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a sophomore at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I was wondering if you had any experiences, like jobs, different work, or skill sets that you think are helpful outside of museum internships for going into a museum career.
Great question.
I think we like looking at someone's resume and seeing creativity in whatever that means to you. I think there's some flexibility there. Like, I studied abroad, and I think that was probably interesting as I was applying for jobs throughout my career. I took improv class. That's fun.
I worked in retail for like 10 years, 12 years or something, and that was just like everything. I feel like I used the stuff I learned doing that every day. Also, my background is in creative writing and writing fiction, and so that comes in useful like all the time. But yeah, those things come to mind.
I have a personal website that I update like once a year, but it's there. I volunteer. That's other things that have sort of created the full picture of who I am on my resume.
Yeah, thank you. I think so. Maybe we have time for one more question from the audience that I think you've been waiting for a while, so maybe we should go over here.
Hi, my name is Jordan. I'm a History of Art and Architecture major with a double minor in Museum Studies and the African and Black Diaspora at DePaul. And I'm in my junior year right now, and I've had like quite a few internships and jobs in the museum field, but I find it like pretty difficult for a woman of color to focus on the African and Black diaspora and to find projects that empower that movement. And so I want to know like what steps I can take to go towards that for my career in museum curation.
I'm happy to so something like it's not always going, like what you're describing, I definitely understand and see happen. You can be in a lot of places and there can be efforts to make things more inclusive or to focus on something that maybe has been understudied and underrepresented, and it could be at varying degrees of success at that moment. I would keep looking around. It might not be here, it might be here. There are some great curators in Chicago that focus on that work. It might not be at a huge institution, it might be at a smaller institution, but there are spaces that is their focus, and you can always work somewhere for a while and then bring all of that skill and whatever you build in those types of environments into a more formidable place that has more boundaries around it about that kind of work. And like that's the exciting part about museums now is like I think we're trying to change things about it. And it's important work, and it's work that you can be involved in different ways.
That sounds hard, so I just wanted to validate and name that as your experience. I'm sorry that it's been hard. I will say, like, I don't know how connected you are on social media with people who work in other museums, but like museum Twitter, there's Facebook groups of people around the country who are passionate about similar things. So if you're feeling alone, I'd encourage you to like find your people, because you're not.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So you've been waiting, so why don't we go ahead and take this last question? Go ahead.
All right, my name's Nick. I'm a senior at Lake Forest College, and I'm a musician and a filmmaker. And I've dealt with like a myriad of health issues over the course of my life, and it's kind of dissuaded me from searching out internships or jobs. I do have a really strong ambition. I work hours every day to try to, get out. Some of my art is provocative. I really want to get to something deeper. I'm just wondering if you guys have dealt with any source of adversity in your guys' life that has maybe precluded you from taking a step forward that you want to take, but you sometimes feel a little bit powerless. Or like, how do you deal with that? How do you get past that?
That's a really important question.
Well, this isn't exactly that, but I've had conversations with colleagues where, and I agreed with this colleague in particular, where you could be in a job that is so intense and stressful and demanding that you don't really have the bandwidth or the energy to look for another job. So you just stick it out for who knows how many months or years where you're not really happy there. So I think it's in that particular situation, it's finding a balance and, identifying like, okay, I don't have to suffer. I don't have to be here. I can do something to, even if it's a lateral move, I don't have to be miserable.
One thing that occurs to me, and like Nikhil did, I want to also acknowledge that struggle because it can be very terrible for people. Everybody has different struggles, and sometimes they're just debilitating physically or emotionally, mentally, any number of ways. And we all have had those moments, and some longer than others and deeper than others, and it's always a struggle. I think what comes to mind for me is money and class, that I didn't come from a lot of money, and so right now, like a lot of you probably are or are becoming, I'm like deep in debt. And that can be the kind of thing where you're like, well, did I have to be in debt? Like, who do I blame for that? Am I to blame for that? Is it society? Well, what now? And so on. And that can be the kind of thing that can feel like impossible to overcome. But I think that I like to think about the things that I can control and the things that I can't. And I often am in advising people at all stages of their career to be assertive about their own value and their own worth and about what they want to do, and to take from their lives and from institutions like this as much as they possibly can, and to put institutions like this in the position of having to respond in various ways. So like, for example, with accessibility, that's something that the institution has not done well enough and that we continue to work on. But also other things like internships that are paid or unpaid and so on. So it's a sort of a multi-pronged thing that doesn't necessarily make life easier, but there is something to be said for a kind of fierceness about your desires. And I have found often that I can generally find a way forward, and I think that's how I find hope personally.
I would say like, I'm sorry too about your experience. I would say like try to, as difficult and challenging as it might be, try to find ways to identify your own needs and put them first. I think, I quickly glossed over that moment in my career path where the dot-com bubble crashed, our company sort of dissolved, and then I started working at a telecom company. But that transition wasn't like a week. And it was really hard. We owed a bunch of money to people. There were a lot of people around us who were deeply in distress. I didn't have a degree, and no one was hiring people without a degree. So for me in that moment, like giving my time structure was important for me to just continue to keep moving. So when we ran our own web company, like I didn't work 40 hours, it was way more than that. But generally like the 9-to-5 structure during the week I found useful. So when I didn't have a job anymore, when the company went down, I was looking for a job, it actually, I think then also took me 6 months to find a job. And I gave myself that 9-to-5 during the week as like my time to look for a job. I was living with my parents at the time. So I got up in the morning at 9, looked for jobs until 5, and then I stopped at 5 and did my own thing. So like structure was really important to like give myself space to do the things I knew I needed to do, and then also like stop doing those things so I could like hang out with friends or create or tinker or do the things that gave me joy.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I want to thank the panel here. Thank you. So we're going to run over by just a couple of minutes, but I have a couple of logistical details that I want to run through to help you prepare for what's coming up the rest of the afternoon. First, so you're going to have lunch coming up for the next hour at 2 o'clock. If you have your programs, hopefully you have those. You've seen the schedule. At 2 o'clock, you're going to come back to this auditorium if you've registered to come to the human resources presentation. And that will be for 30 minutes. The doors will open at 1:30, so you'll be able to come back whenever you've finished eating or whatever you want to do for the next hour, and come into the auditorium for that. It'll be until 2:30. And then after that, from 2:45 to 3:45 are these staff breakout sessions which are taking place all around the museum. So I would suggest in the next hour, if you haven't done already, take a look at the ones you really want to go to and use the map or ask like how can you map out your path to those spaces. And you're going to see people out there, as you've already noticed, who have the stickers, and then who also have signs like these, so that should help you find where you need to go. I want to just sort of quickly run through some of the breakout sessions and maybe add a little bit of context for them in case you're curious. So you can see the list here. Photography means, in this case, will mean the curatorial department photography, so you'll be able to go down and talk to one of the curatorial staff about working with exhibitions and gallery spaces in the photography department. Textiles, same thing as the curatorial staff. Community relations and partnerships works with people throughout Chicago and builds relationships. In our Department of Learning and Public Engagement, Live Arts and Public Programs is in Learning and Public Engagement, and that will be performances, artists making music in the galleries, lectures, things like that. Interactive learning environments is if you're interested in thinking about art experiences through environments and and spaces. So that is also in Learning and Public Engagement. Interpretation learning and public engagement is a big department. Interpretation is also in a learning and public engagement, or LPE. And that is working with curatorial staff, thinking about learning and people's self-guided experiences in the galleries. So if you're interested in thinking about those things. Academic engagement and research thinks a lot about curatorial work, thinking about academic research and working with objects and conservation and those sorts of things. Accessibility is a couple of staff who are going to be talking about the museum and accessibility, as we were just noting, which differently abled people who are in the galleries and how we're thinking about those sorts of things in our spaces. Experience design is Nikhil's breakout, and you're actually going to be at that one, right? Yeah, so you can see Nikhil again. Learning and public engagement, that one is going to be about sort of talking about our work in that department sort of more broadly and what museum education can look like here at the museum. Fundraising, institutional relations is thinking about corporate sponsorships, grant writing, things like that. Finance and strategy. Data integrity is a new one that we're doing this year that ensures that all records related to acquisitions, donors, and gifts and so on are correctly maintained and secure. So if you're interested in that kind of work. Marketing, publishing, communications is if you're interested in information about design or our member magazine or the website. Special events, individual and affiliate giving is another sort of fundraising operation. Our membership services, conservation, so if you're interested in sort of art and science kind of work and thinking about working with objects in that way. Art installation is about like art handling and actually putting our spaces together. Imaging is people in the museum who are working to who are taking images of work that we're going to use for our promotional purposes or for documentation purposes. American art is another curatorial session, so you can talk about with some curatorial staff. Exhibition, management, and design thinks a lot about what our spaces and our exhibitions are going to look like and feel like for our visitors. So I want to point out that we do have color-coded ID tags, so you'll see any of these. If you see people wearing any of those, you can feel free to talk with them or answer questions, or of course, people with the little jam stickers and the signs, we're also happy to do that for you. And I think that's everything. So thank you all. Enjoy your lunch. Enjoy the afternoon. Feel free to say hi if you see us.